Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Project 2025 educational panel. Thank you for joining us. We're really excited to be bringing you this educational event. With so much discussion surrounding the 900-page Project 2025 playbook, many of us don't have the time to go through it in full. That's why we're so thrilled to have this panel of experts here to share key insights on how Project 2025 could impact our lives. The National Federation of Business and Professional Women's Clubs is a 105-year-old nonprofit dedicated to supporting working women. We have a very robust advocacy platform, which this falls into. As a nonpartisan organization, we don't take sides politically. It's very important to note that. But we do have a responsibility to inform our members about legislation that could affect them, and Project 2025 is no exception. Tonight, our panelists will cover these proposed changes and what they mean for everyday Americans. Now, before I kick things over to our panelists and start up this event, I do see our national president, Barbara Bozeman, is here. So I just want to give her a moment to welcome everyone and say a few words. So, Barbara.
Thank you very much, Emily. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to tonight's educational panel on Project 2025 and its implications for women. We are very fortunate, and thank you to all of our impressive lineup of speakers who will guide us through how the various elements of this initiative will affect women across multiple sectors, be it in the workplace, access to healthcare, and in community leadership. I definitely would be remiss if I did not extend a heartfelt thank you to our advocacy team led by Emily Van Vleck, bringing together this incredible program. The dedication and hard work that they have done make this important conversation possible, and I know we will all leave here better informed and more empowered. While Project 2025 may address a wide range of topics, our focus is definitely to examine with care and insight how it intersects with women's lives and the challenges it will pose. And I encourage you all to engage with the speakers, ask questions, and keep the dialogue constructive and open. I do not presume to want to take up any more of your time with this, and I would like to turn this back over to Emily. And thank you all again for joining us this evening. Emily?
Thank you, Barbara. And I would be remiss if I did not thank Linda Wilson, a member of the advocacy committee who really pitched this idea, and we wouldn't be here without Linda. So thank you, Linda, so much. Now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome our first panelist for the evening, Miss Emily Gee. Emily R.G. is the Senior Vice President for Inclusive Growth at American Progress. In her role, she oversees economic policy, health policy, and the Women's Initiative. She guides the department's research, policy development, and advocacy to support equitable economic growth and improve health and well-being. Previously, she was Vice President for Health Policy at American Progress, leading the organization's efforts across healthcare and public health. Prior to joining American Progress, Gee was an economist in the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, where she worked on implementation of the Affordable Care Act. She also served as an economist on the staff of the Council of Economic Advisors in the Obama White House. She's been quoted, and her work has been cited in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Politico, Forbes, Vox, and other publications. She has extensive expertise in healthcare coverage, affordability, and financing, and she is a member of the Healthcare Services Board of the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. Gee holds a PhD in economics from Boston University and an AB in government from Harvard College. And she is originally from Washington State, which is my neighbor in Oregon. So thank you so much, Emily, for being here, and I pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Barbara, Emily, and also Linda for having me here tonight. It's my pleasure to speak to you all and tell you about Project 2025. So let's get started. I'm going to share some slides here. So as Emily said, this is this is a 900-page document that you and I are fortunate. My colleagues have actually read every single page of this, and so I am from the Center for American Progress, which is a nonprofit, independent policy institute based in Washington, D.C. And one of our projects this year was a project to expose Project 2025 and what it would mean for everyday Americans. Today, I'm going to focus on things that would directly impact the middle class, but it is a handbook that has policies across all areas from foreign policy to domestic policy. I think would affect people here in Washington, D.C., but also people at their kitchen tables across America. So let me start with an overview of Project 2025, and then I'll give you 5 examples of ways that Americans could expect it to directly impact their lives and not for the better. What I'm going to focus on is the component of Project 2025, which is a handbook basically for federal agencies to carry out an agenda through executive power. So, through the presidency, through agencies like HHS or the IRS, and it goes agency by agency in different chapters. This is meant to serve as the handbook for far-right presidential administration. But what I think is notable is that it would give politicians, judges, and the courts more control over Americans' lives. What's notable about this is it's not just a list of policies, but it really does concentrate the federal power in the presidency and uses all levers of government to dismantle checks and balances of basic democracy and pulls the rug out from America's middle class. Heritage Foundation does tend to do these essentially a transition document every presidential cycle. But what I think is particularly notable in this year's edition is it really is an authoritarian playbook that stretches the bounds or even abuses the bounds of executive power. And rather than using our democratic system, which depends on checks and balances of Congress passing legislation, the executive being able to sign or veto, the courts being able to keep a check on what the executive branch does. This plan also calls for undermining that system of checks and balances to ram through this agenda. The who behind this is, first and foremost, the Heritage Foundation, but it is the work of more than 400 people who helped fashion this playbook, from directly writing the chapters to being part of work groups that found consensus or sometimes disagreement on different ideas in here. Among the many folks in here are Russ Vought, a self-described Christian nationalist, Stephen Miller, whose name you might recognize from the Trump administration, who's long espoused weakening the system in order to get this far-right agenda done. And then other names like Ben Carson, Ken Cuccinelli, Peter Navarro, and then Roger Servino for the HHS chapter. So let's go through a few examples of what this would mean for everyday Americans. Starting with the economy. So and some of these policies really do sound somewhat asinine, but when you dig deeper and analyze what they would do for American families, they're actually quite harmful, often to the benefit of corporations and the wealthy, but to the detriment of the middle class. And one example of this is a policy in the chapter that includes taxes that would purports to simplify tax brackets by reducing the current different incremental marginal taxes into just two brackets, 15% and 30%. And so the problem with consolidating these brackets is that for low-income people, you generally pay lower taxes, higher-income people pay the highest taxes, marginal tax rates. And when you sort of squish these tax brackets, what you end up doing is pulling up the tax bracket for the lowest income Americans and pulling down the tax bracket for the wealthiest Americans. And so in effect, what you've done is charge higher taxes to those who have the lowest incomes in our country, but also given a huge tax break to those who are wealthy. And so we calculate that a typical family in the U.S. would pay about $3,000 more under Project 2025's tax plan. Well, the 45,000 wealthiest families in the country would get an average tax cut of $1.5 million each. Over the long term, they also call for replacing income and corporate taxes with the consumption tax. So instead of taxing profits or taxing income, it would tax what you consume. And this, is well known to be a very regressive tax in the sense that lower income households would have a much higher tax burden relative to what they earn, relative to higher households. And so you would see that the bottom 80% of earners would actually see their after-tax income fall by about 6 to 28%. Another aspect of this would be undermining retirement for seniors. So the project supporters have some overlap with the Republican Study Committee, which is a sort of another set of far-right policies. And the supporters, that project supporters, have called for raising the full retirement age from Social Security from 67 to 69. And so that 2-year bump up means that people will have to wait longer to get their benefits. And about 245 million people would see a cut in their Social Security benefits. This is huge when you sort of think about the accrual over time. So the future typical retiree would lose about $46,000 to about $100,000 in benefits over a decade, depending on when they start claiming Social Security. I would point out too that this means more harm for women because the longer you live, sort of the more you collect Social Security, but also if you were to cut benefits, that means that that effect of that cut compounds over time. And so if you think about what that does for the long term, if you have to drive down your retirement savings over a longer period, that means lower wealth in retirement and more reliance on Social Security benefits, which essentially undermines, one of the purported goals of making people more self-sufficient. There are also there's a whole chapter on what the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services should do. I expect maybe Carrie will get into some of those because some of them directly affect women. But let me focus on 2: prescription drugs and health coverage. So the plan calls for repealing the Inflation Reduction Act, which was the sweeping law passed in 2022 that made historic investments in combating climate change, but also included some provisions that help change Medicare to lower out-of-pocket costs for Medicare beneficiaries. So the goal of the IRA was to sort of smooth out the people's drug costs over time through some benefit changes in Part D of Medicare, as well as for the first time, give Medicare the ability to negotiate prescription drug costs, prescription drug prices rather. This is an incredibly popular policy across people of all political persuasions. And it's also saving people money out of pocket because co-insurance is lower for Medicare drugs. It also lowered the cost of insulin for Medicare beneficiaries to $35 a month. And it's a very popular policy. And yet, Project 2025 calls for wholesale repeal of the Inflation Reduction Act. So this means changing Medicare as we know it now, increasing the cost of prescription drugs. So it would make seniors pay higher drug prices because Medicare would no longer be able to negotiate for lower prices. It would revert those plan design changes that help enrollees smooth out their prescription drug costs over the course of the year. It would eliminate that insulin cap of $35. It would also eliminate no cost vaccine coverage. Thanks to the IRA, beneficiaries no longer have to pay for vaccines like the shingles vaccine. They can get those at no cost, which is a good move for public health. In all, about 18.5 million Americans who are on Medicare, that's both seniors as well as people with disabilities and others covered by the program, would pay about $400 more per person per year for prescription drugs under Project 2025. And in the end, this also endangers Medicare's long-term finances. It makes it harder to access drugs they need. It would also institute other changes that make it harder for Medicare beneficiaries to make a choice of provider. And it would also make the default for Medicare seniors Medicare Advantage private plans, which we know are overpaid, which is not a good use of taxpayer money, but it also gives people narrower networks and less choice of providers. In healthcare more generally, Project 2025 would imperil access to both healthcare coverage and also long-term care. One way it does this is by imposing caps on Medicaid enrollment, the program for low-income Americans, which could terminate coverage for up to 18.5 million people. The Project 25 is a little vague about what it means by imposing limits on Medicaid. It's not quite clear if that means a lifetime cap on benefits or some sort of time-limited cap on Medicaid. But from looking at other far-right attempts to do this at the state level, I think time limiting that is probably what you could expect the authors to have in mind. So this would hurt people who have low incomes and don't have employer-sponsored insurance and rely on Medicaid for coverage. This is a policy that would, hurt people who really need coverage. Sometimes people are on Medicaid because they can't work, or because they, have a health condition that really, chronic condition or even acute condition that prevents them from working. So this is a double whammy for people who both might not be able to make enough income to be out of poverty, but also they would no longer be able to get Medicaid enrollment. So even if this policy were, as conservatives often claim, only applying to able-bodied adults, the definition of disability used for Medicaid qualification often excludes people who are not sort of don't meet that definition of disability, but really are not able to work, or may have some other may have some condition that needs ongoing care. Calls for deregulating the framework of the ACA that would weaken protections for pre-existing conditions. So the plan essentially promotes insurance plans that don't have to abide by the protections in the ACA. That includes, and those things are really essential for making sure that when people have healthcare coverage, it's comprehensive. So one might expect that some of these protections for people with pre-existing conditions might include things like rolling back the requirement that plans cover essential health benefits. All plans offered in the individual market in order to comply with the ACA need to offer things like prescription drugs and mental health care and maternity care, which wasn't always the case before the ACA. It would also allow insurers to go back to denying coverage for people based on their health history. And lastly, it would cap Medicaid funding to states, and by setting per capita caps or other funding mechanisms that hurt states' ability to cover their people. And lastly, Project 2025 has a number of policies that would hurt American workers. It would undermine the role of the National Labor Relations Board, which helps protect workers and worker organizing. It calls on measures to make it harder to join a union or form a union. It would also undermine overtime pay. The Biden administration has rolled out a new rule that would help that strengthens overtime standards, so that if somebody's working more than 40 hours a week, they're entitled to additional compensation. Project 25 seeks to poke holes in that, which prevents workers from being fairly compensated. It rolls back the clock on child labor protections, including allowing minors to do dangerous jobs. And then it also makes it easier for employers to discriminate by reducing the authority of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, making it harder to track data on civil rights violations. And so I think the whole package here is this is a plan that's really favorable to corporations and abuses of corporate power, but really harmful to workers. So we have a number of resources from CAP on Project 2025. These are just 5 examples of things that we've written on. You can find on our website roughly 40, and still working on them, analyses of various Project 2025 policies. We've also got some constituency fact sheets if you want to know specifically what it would do for workers or parents or seniors. We've got a number of 50 state fact sheets, which I've previewed the Arizona one in this blue text box here. So it has information on taxes, Social Security, the number of people affected by some really severe education cuts. And then we've also got some research that we've done on the best ways to talk about Project 2025 and help Americans take the threat seriously for advocacy. So you can also find on our website a way to contact us if you want to find out more about anything. And I look forward to taking your questions at the end of the session. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for that whirlwind. I know there's so much in there, and as a union gal myself, the attacks on unions are really concerning. I know many people, healthcare as well is so huge, and those changes could be detrimental to many of our members, and just so many Americans as a whole. So thank you, Emily. And if you want to get me any of those links, I'm happy to send those out to anyone that's registered in our follow-up email. So thank you. And with that, I'm going to welcome our next panelist, Dr. Carrie Baker. So Carrie N. Baker, JD, PhD, is the Bauman Professor of American Studies and Chair of the Program for the Study of Women and Gender at Smith College, and co-founded the Five College Program in Reproductive Health, Rights, and Justice. Her research and teaching focus on gender law and public policy, including reproductive rights, sexual harassment, and sex trafficking. She is a regular writer and contributing author at Ms. Magazine, has a monthly column in the Daily Hampshire Gazette, and a monthly radio show, Feminist Futures, on WHMP in Northampton. Her forthcoming book, Abortion Pills, U.S. History and Politics, put out by Amherst College Press, is due out in December. Where do you find the time for all of it?
A busy person. Well, thank you so much. It's great to see everybody. By the way, I do notice a number of people with ERA backgrounds. Project 2025 doesn't say anything explicitly about the ERA, but the people behind Project 2025 are entirely against recognizing the fully ratified 28th Amendment of the Constitution, the Equal Rights Amendment. So I did want to just say that here at the outset. So my talk tonight is based in part on an article, and let's see if I get this so it shows up, in Ms. Magazine in the current issue. It's called Misogynist Manifesto. Okay, it's not going to show. Anyway, it's in the current issue of Ms. Magazine, and I encourage you to watch it. I'm going to share my screen because I actually have a picture of it there, and as well as some other stuff. So I've done a lot of writing and public speaking on Project 2025. And if you go to my website, carriebakerphd.com, all the articles I've written are there that get into specific aspects, like what's it going to do to abortion? What's it going to do to women's workplace rights? What's it going to do to, a whole the education system. So I encourage you, if you want to know more, to go to some of those, go to those sources. So, all right, so let me see if I can get this to go. This is the article in Ms. Magazine. It's called Misogynist Manifesto, and it's sort of a detailed analysis of what Project 2025 has in store for women's rights. I couldn't put everything in here because I had like a 3,000 word limit. There's so much more, but these were the things that I pulled out that I thought were the most shocking and that folks really need to know about. And I'll talk about some of those today. So I think one thing that's important to keep in mind is that there are about a coalition of 100 organizations behind Project 2025, and it's a who's who list of organizations that have opposed women's rights for decades. Groups like Concern for Women for America, Independent Women's Forum, Eagle Forum, that's Phyllis Schlafly's group, the Susan B. Anthony Foundation, an anti-abortion group, the recent Moms for Liberty, and others, and including the Alliance Defending Freedom and First Liberty, which are two law firms that have been bringing a lot of the lawsuits to try to, like, for instance, ban abortion pills. And Turning Point USA, which is the Koch brothers organization. This is just a few, but like when I went down the list, I'm like, oh yeah, all the people that have led the fight against women's rights are on this lineup. But I also just briefly wanted to talk a little bit about my big view of what's going on. So, you probably all read about Leonard Leo funding the Federalist Society to take over the courts during the first Trump administration. Well, he's bankrolling a lot of those organizations that are in that coalition behind Project 2025. And I think that his goal is to do a similar takeover, right-wing takeover of the federal government during a second Trump administration. So if Trump was very successful taking over the Supreme Court and many of the lower courts, Now they're going after the executive branch, and they want to do it in a way that's permanent, that will resist if, in the future, a Democratic government were to get back in, to resist the ability to revive the federal government's civil rights infrastructure, which has been built up over 50 years. They want to destroy that from inside. How do they plan to do it? Well, they explicitly say we want to dismantle the administrative state. They say the solution is not to tinker with this or that government program or to replace this or that bureaucrat. These are not problems of technocratic efficiency, but of national sovereignty and constitutional governance. We solve them not by trimming and reshaping the leaves, but by ripping out the trees, root and branch. They're talking about ripping out the executive branch of the federal government and all of the agencies in that government. The authors of Project 2025 boast about, and I quote, how to fire supposedly unfireable federal bureaucrats and how to muzzle woke propaganda at every level of government. So I'm sure you all know we have like 50,000 federal employees, and they're in all kinds of agencies, Department of Agriculture, Department of Commerce, and most of them are career civil servants that serve across political parties, that are scientists, that are expert backgrounds. Their plan is to get rid of all those people and to replace those people with ideologues trained in the Project 2025 agenda. So when we talk, here's one guy who's saying this, the fellow that you mentioned, Emily. He was quoted as saying, "The president day one will be a wrecking ball for the administrative state." And then, even more explicitly, this is, of course, Steve Bannon, Trump's strategist. We're going to rip and shred apart the federal government. That's what he has said. So that's their plan, right? If the executive branch agency enforces a lot of our laws, including the laws that around women's rights, we're going to just decimate that. That's the plan. So more specifically, the Project 2025 is actually 4 things. One is that policy agenda that Emily talked about. But the second is a presidential personnel database of vetted conservatives who have been trained at the third part, which is the Presidential Administration Academy. So in some of the videos that are used in that academy have leaked to the press, so you can see them. They're quite terrifying. But they're basically, just like the Federalist Society created a list of here's the judges we want to have appointed to the court. What they're doing is they're creating a massive database of these people who are trained in the Project 2025 ideology and specific plan to populate the entire federal government after they fire all the civil servants. That's the plan. Normally, political appointees are just at the top. Now they're going to make the entire federal government political appointees. The fourth part is a 180-day playbook, which is what they hope to achieve in the first 180 days. So the 4 goals of Project 2025, what are they? Restore the family as the centerpiece of American life and protect our children. Now, all of these terms are highly loaded. What they mean by family is very specific. What they mean by children is very specific. What they mean by American life. And I'll talk a little bit about that, but it's not what we normally think of these things. Dismantle the administrative state and return self-government to the American people. Who are we talking about? Who are the American people? What do we mean by self-government? Defend our nation's sovereignty, borders, and bounty against global threats. And fourth, secure our God-given individual rights to live freely, what our Constitution calls the blessings of liberty. And so the words God-given, what does that mean? What does free mean? What does blessings of liberty mean? I mean, it's quite interesting. This document is a Christian nationalist document, and woven throughout is Christian nationalist language. I'll speak a little bit to that. By the way, I encourage you to read the introduction. I know that 887 pages is too long for anybody, but to get a sense of the tone and the radicalness of this document, please, I encourage you. The introduction is only about 20 pages. So these are some of the things that will impact women's rights. Things like banning abortion pills nationwide and limiting access to contraception, gutting programs to help poor and low-income mothers feed and care for their children, pressuring single mothers to marry, rolling back Title IX protections against sexual harassment and assault at educational institutions, eliminating LGBTQ rights, removing environmental and labor protections, shutting U.S. borders and rounding up and deporting immigrants, making draconian cuts to Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security. And by the way, one way they're going to control the blue states, the Democratic states, is that they're going to make Medicare and Medicaid funding contingent on doing what they want you to do. So for instance, if you don't follow their restrictive abortion requirements, then you can't get Medicare care money or Medicaid money. Or if you don't, get rid of DEI, then we're going to cut funding off to your state. So there's a lot of ways in which they're going to try to control the progressive states, the states that have protections for women's rights. Okay, so here's a quote just to give you a little bit of a sense of the language that they use and the way they speak. This is Kevin Roberts, who's the Heritage Foundation president. He said, the next conservative president must make the institutions of American civil society hard targets for woke culture warriors. This starts with deleting the terms sexual orientation and gender identity, diversity, equity, and inclusion, gender, gender equality, gender equity, gender awareness, gender sensitive, abortion, reproductive health, reproductive rights, and any other term used to deprive Americans of their First Amendment rights out of every federal rule, agency regulation, contract, grant, regulation, and piece of legislation that exists. I mean, it's a quite thorough, extreme thing. They are going to whitewash the federal government websites, get rid of any language about equality, about women's rights, about women's reproductive rights. I mean, it goes on and on. So I'm going to talk about a few aspects. One is the family. What do they have in store for the family? What do they have in store for reproductive rights? What do they have in store for the workplace as far as women's rights and the educational system? So Project 2025 promotes the traditional heterosexual marriage, stigmatizing single parenthood and certainly same-sex marriage, and cutting programs to support single mothers and their children. It directs the next president to develop policies and programs to, and I quote, maintain a biblically based, social science reinforced definition of marriage and family. The document explains, for the sake of child well-being, programs should affirm that children require and deserve both the love and nurturing of a mother and the play and protection of a father. So you can already get this sense of gender stereotypes within marriage, but it goes further. They direct the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services to reverse the agency's focus on equity, including subsidizing single mothers, disincentivizing work, penalizing marriage, replacing such policies with those encouraging marriage, work, motherhood, fatherhood, and nuclear families. To pressure single mothers to marry, the authors recommend redirecting Title X family planning money away from contraception and towards counseling that people should be getting married. To economically coerce marriage, the plan recommends redirecting child welfare funding towards marriage and relationship education and redirecting welfare dollars under TANF, which is about helping poor mothers and their children, towards promoting marriage, healthy family formation, and delaying sex to prevent pregnancy. To make single parenting harder, the plan recommends adding work requirements for single parents receiving any non-cash benefit worth $50 per month for 6 consecutive months, including TANF. It does not recommend raising the minimum wages to help single mothers or supporting the creation of more living wage jobs. On childcare, Project 2025 calls for, quote, prioritizing funding for home-based childcare, not universal childcare. And it recommends eliminating Head Start, the critically important early childhood education program for low-income children. And there's nothing in Project 2025 about paid parental leave or supporting parents who in the workplace who need time off to birth and care for their children. And so these are just some of the things, and here's some quotes. They definitely want to protect faith-based organizations to get federal money and then do religious things. And I wanted to just show on childcare, this is a stunning quote. Children who spend significant time in daycare experience higher rates of anxiety, depression, and neglect, as well as poor educational and developmental outcomes. This is completely false, but this is what they say. Instead of providing universal daycare, funding should go to parents, either to offset the cost of staying home with a child, which is really what they want women to do, or to pay for familial in-home childcare. And then well, Emily already mentioned how they want to try to allow child labor. And this is just one example, this quote here. But so that's the marriage side. They want to really encourage women to get married, not to be single parents, and to produce children. And then am I going too long, Emily? Do I need to cut off? Or
I could listen to you talk all night, but we have about 2 minutes left.
Okay. So they're really going after abortion and reproductive rights. And this is just somewhat of a list. I already mentioned about abortion pills, but they want to force states to track women that get abortions and turn over that information to the federal government. They want to try to limit access to contraception. For instance, get rid of the contraceptive mandate that requires employers to cover contraception. They want to try to, there's just so many ways in which they are going after not only access to abortion health care, but also to contraception. They want to completely defund Planned Parenthood. They want to reverse many Biden administration policy that hospitals have to provide emergency care to women who have complications later in pregnancy. That's the case that went up to the Supreme Court. In the workplace, they want to rescind Lyndon Johnson's executive orders 11246 and 11375 that required equity, equality, sex equality for government contractors. They want to narrow the applicability of Title VII. They want to get rid of disparate impact discrimination claims. And also, they want to narrow the definition of sex to just biological sex rather than things like gender stereotyping. They want to expand religious exemptions under Title VII, weaken the power of the EEOC to enforce Title VII, and shift enforcement over to the Department of Justice and eliminate all DEI. In education, they want to get rid of the Department of Education. They want to reverse back to Trump's Title IX sexual harassment guidelines. They want to narrow the definition of sex under Title IX and increase public funding for religious schools who are not subject to Title IX. For more information, accountable.us has some great resources on, and they're constantly putting out new resources. So I encourage you to go there. These are some of my recent articles. And again, if you go to my website, you can find this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carrie. That was that's again a whirlwind of information. So much. I think it's all items that we've seen, right? But seeing the actual quotes there from the document is particularly jarring. You know, the proof is in the pudding, as they say. And if you would like one of those great Equality Has No Deadline backwards, we can get you one of those on our website. But thank you so much. If anyone again has questions for the panelists, please stick them in the chat or wait until the end and we'll give you an open question and answer. In the meantime, it is my pleasure to bring you our final panelist for the night. Congresswoman Judy Chu, thank you so much for joining us. So Congresswoman Chu was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in July of 2009. She represents the 28th Congressional District, which includes Pasadena and the West San Gabriel Valley of Southern California. Representative Chu currently serves on the powerful House Ways and Means Committee, which has jurisdiction over legislation pertaining to taxes, revenue, Social Security, and Medicare. In that committee, Representative Chu is a member of the subcommittees on health, giving her oversight over healthcare reform and crucial safety net programs, worker and family support, and oversight. She also serves in the House Small Business Committee, which has oversight of the Small Business Administration, as well as the House Budget Committee. She was first elected to the Board of Education for Garvey School District in 1985. From there, she was elected to the Monterey Park City Council, where she served as mayor 3 times. She was then elected to the State Assembly and then California's elected tax board, known as the State Board of Equalization. In 2009, she became the first Chinese American woman elected to Congress in history. We're so delighted to have you with us, and I'll pass it over to you, Congresswoman.
Well, I am going to cut my comments extremely short since there has been an extremely thorough delineation of what Project 2025 is. So I'm just going to say a few words about how serious Republicans are about implementing this. in Congress, when there are big bills that are going through, whether they are appropriations bills or the National Defense Authorization Act, these are must-pass bills. Republicans put in all kinds of amendments, and the amendments cover the range. These amendments may not pass, but they put forth the amendments so that they can give some airing to it. And actually, many of the amendments are what you see in Project 2025. These are things that eliminate DEI or create restrictions for numerous programs, or say that, say the Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona, should only earn $1 for his salary. Basically, it's the same idea as eliminating the Department of Education. As you know, that's not a serious idea and should not be a serious amendment, but they put that forth anyway because they're sending a message. So do not think that these Project 2025 ideas are way out there in terms of what Republican thinking is. It is indeed part and parcel of the kind of thinking that they've been having. And actually, from my perspective, as somebody who knows certain federal departments very well, it's actually pretty detailed. I mean, these are Trump administrators that were in office during the Trump era, and there were 140 of them that participated in the writing of Project 2025. So they know enough to know which programs they want to eliminate or gut. But here's the bottom line. Under Project 2025, extreme MAGA Republicans will tell every single American how to live their life. It means total control over Americans' most personal decisions, including criminalizing abortion nationwide with no exceptions and taking away access to birth control and fertility services like IVF. They want to squeeze the middle class while lining the pockets of billionaires and big corporations. They want to repeal or at least gut the Affordable Care Act and hike up healthcare costs on everyone and raise taxes on the middle class while giving CEOs huge new tax breaks. They want to end Social Security and Medicare as we know it right now, forcing workers to work longer for less while dramatically raising healthcare costs for seniors. They are threatening to shut down government if they can't impose Project 2025. Kind of similar, actually, to Republicans in Congress now, because they only have a 4-vote majority. And so what happens is that any small grouping of Republicans can stop any bill from going forth, and actually they can shut government down. That's why in the last few critical votes, Speaker Johnson has had to rely on Democrats to supply the majority of votes to even keep government open. And so we have to fight Project 2025. One of the first things we did was to put together in Congress a Stop Project 2025 task force. And we put together a House Resolution 1386, of which I'm a co-sponsor. And it expresses the sense of the House of Representatives on Project 2025. It condemns the harmful provisions of Project 2025, including its plan to weaken reproductive rights, and makes it clear that this effort must be rejected in the strongest terms possible. I also joined my colleagues in sending a letter to the president of the Heritage Foundation, who played a huge role in creating Project 2025, urging him to unveil Project 2025's fourth pillar, the 180-day transition playbook, which is the most immediate steps a future Trump administration would take to roll out these plans, which has been undisclosed up until this point. Shining a light on as many details of this plan as possible is very, very important so that we can equip ourselves to better fight back and ensure that there are systems in place to protect us from these extreme policies. That's why discussions like today's are a proactive and coalition building. We want everybody in America to know what's to be expected if Project 2025 is realized and what we can do to stop it. Actually, I find it really kind of ironic that Republicans put it out because they put out an exact blueprint of what they would do. And it has been an incredible tool for us Democrats. All we have to do is point to a page in Project 2025 to let people know what the future holds for the American people in that particular subject area if Trump were to become president. And so I know this is not an election discussion here, but I'm talking as somebody who just came back from Philadelphia and is now heading out to Nevada, that this election comes down to 7 battleground states. It's because of our electoral college system that we are in this situation. And so, yeah, it comes down to Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and North Carolina. And we need to make sure that everybody who can cast a vote will cast a vote and that they know what is in store for them depending on how they cast that vote. And that's where Project 2025 comes into focus. Once people understand what's in Project 2025, they don't like it. The American people don't like it. They don't like this control over their lives. So it is a very, very powerful tool in our arsenal. And certainly we talk about it every chance we get. In fact, in every speech now that I make in Congress, I refer to some aspect of Project 2025. So it's very, very powerful. So that's what I would say about Project 2025. And I hope that that everybody can understand how it harms Americans, but also why we need to tell everybody how it harms them.
Thank you so much. I absolutely agree. Education is our most powerful tool at this point, which is why it's imperative that we have these educational panels and discuss it and tell people what's in store for them, what's in there. You know, as a nonpartisan organization, we can't tell people how to vote or show any any political leaning towards any side, but you educate people and say, hey, you know, vote to whatever works best for you. It's beyond party lines. So thank you again so much for being here. We do have some time for questions. So if anyone has a question, feel free to raise your hand or put them in the chat. I know I saw a couple of them that have been addressed.
Well, I'm going to take my leave right here since there are 2 very competent people who could answer all the questions.
Sure. So I was wondering, Congresswoman, if you would chat with us for a moment before you leave about what's going on with HRES 1386, and the work that you're doing there.
So we have a Republican House of Representatives. So all we can do is introduce resolutions such as this. We can't get a vote on something that would go against what Republicans are really proposing. Because like I said, with the amendments that they put in, they actually reflect Project 2025. So there's no way that it would get anywhere. On the other hand, it has been important for us to bring the focus in on Project 2025. And I have to tell you something very funny, which is when we bring up Project 2025 in a Republican or bipartisan setting, the Republicans we notice in Congress change the subject. They don't like to admit that they actually have a Project 2025. So it was released, and to the detriment of the Republicans that really want it.
Mhm.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for the insight on what's going on within the House of Representatives. It's interesting to see that aspect of it. And thank you so much for spending your afternoon, evening with us. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Emily, I do also want to say they're trying to achieve Project 2025 also through the courts. So, they're trying to do it in Congress, but they're filing lawsuits to try to realize the goals of Project 2025. And this is going to be relevant whether Harris wins or not. Certainly, obviously, if Trump gets in, we're going to really have to deal with it. But even if Trump loses, if Harris, they're going to pursue, this is their agenda that they're going to pursue, and they're going to use the courts to do it and attempt to do it through Congress. So, for instance, just yesterday, 3 states have revived the mifepristone case, the case where they were trying to ban abortion pills nationwide. That's in Project 2025, but they're trying to do it through the courts as well. So, if Trump gets in, he'll appoint an FDA that will pull that pill off the market. But if that doesn't happen, they're trying to do it through the courts. And that's true with many of these things.
Yeah, they just find their loopholes and ways to keep fighting. Does anyone have questions for our panelists? I don't see any raised hands or check the chat. You guys have stunned them into silence with all of the information.
Well, I have a couple more things I could say while people are thinking, but I don't have to. But things I didn't mention, but on sex education, they want to try to get rid of comprehensive sex education and have only abstinence-based sex education across the country that teaches people to not have sex. This is notoriously ineffective. It contributes to unwanted pregnancies and abortion, but this is what they want. And again, it's because this evangelical, narrow sort of view of religion, which is pervasive throughout the document. They also, they, despite all this pushing for people to carry pregnancies to term, there's nothing in there about addressing maternal mortality or morbidity or high infant death rates, right? And we know that in countries that have states that have banned abortion, infant mortality has gone up, maternal mortality or morbidity has gone up, but there's nothing in here about how to deal with that. The other thing they're going to do, and I think this will be devastating to science, is that they will not fund science. They will fund sort of pet projects, like we'll fund you if you find out how abortion hurts women, but we're not going to fund you to do research more generally. It's very like only, they're going to break up the CDC. They're going to take NIH funding and direct it towards political projects. And as a scholar and somebody in higher education, it's really quite shocking to me what they are proposing. Yeah, sure.
Yes, my name is Sher Singh. I am the Arts and Culture Chair internationally, but nationally, I'm the Justice, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Chair. And I think I would be remiss if I didn't make a comment because it's so embedded, the DEI portion of it, and it's really scary.
Yes.
And I appreciate all the information you're giving us because it's a hard read, and many of us may not have time, or it just doesn't resonate with us. So thank you for coming and doing this, and I hope that Emily and our national board extend this and maybe bring more to educate others as well. Any woman who wants to hear how it will affect us all. But certainly what you've given us is quite a bit. I have to relook at it and sort of savor what I've heard. So thank you very much. And Emily, Guy as well, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, if this thing passes, Sherry, you're out of a chair. No DEI chair for you. Um, yes, and we have recorded this event and it will be available on our YouTube channel, and everyone who's registered will get the link to that. So never fear. Any other comments, questions?
Oh, I was going to make a comment.
Sure.
Okay, I'm with the North Carolina National Chapter, and I'm on the Advocacy Committee. Well, I voted today. Early voting in North Carolina started today. I made it my business to go today, and it was a crowd of people there, and I'm glad. But I'm thinking about the abortion, anti-abortion, anti-this, anti-that, and I always say, and then I want to get rid of all the things that help women when they have a baby. They want to get rid of the Medicaid, the Medicare. They want to get rid of the food stamps and the health, paying for the doctors and everything. But yet and still, what happens when they have the baby?
Mm-hmm.
They want you to have it, but who's going to take care of it?
They want you to
Okay.
stay at home and take care of it and marry a husband who's a breadwinner who will then fund it.
But he
Yeah,
won't get
right.
any overtime pay.
Yeah, who's going to be abusive and getting babies everywhere else too? Okay, we're not going there.
Yep.
But I mean, really, they really don't think about the reason why they want to. I don't think any woman in her right mind is going to get pregnant every first Saturday and get rid of it next Saturday. That's just stupid and unhealthy.
Mm-hmm.
But when somebody's having problems and issues, and then you got to go to the hospital and halfway die before they'll help you, does that make any sense to anybody in a reasonable sense? It's just unreal. But anyway, that's a whole other issue. But as an instructor, I teach at the community college here, and I talk with my students, and it's civics and government, and it is on and popping in that class when we get started, and they're learning stuff. And they said, well, we didn't learn this in high school. I mean, a lot of this stuff is not taught anymore. So we got into it, and I had to, some children live that I'm hurry up. They live with their grandparents or something like that. Or grandparents help take care of them. I said, well, did you know they're trying to get rid of your granddad's Social Security checks and Medicare checks that he worked and paid into? And they were sitting there like, what? And I said, really, think about it. And we talked about the Project 2025 and all that. But it's just unreal how many people are not up to date on what's going on, not hearing the true stories, not really believing what's really being said. No, this man is not joking.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Absolutely.
as a fellow teacher, I'm trying to educate them the best I can and talk with them. But I just wish somebody was to explain to the people, reasonable people, if I have this baby, who's gonna take care of it? I gotta work. I can't take care of my kids and go to work. I don't have enough money to pay for babysitters. Reasonable people. Now, and then what would happen if they dropped the babies off to the police department when they had them, or dropped them off to the hospital? Oh, they're worse than whatever. So they can't win either way.
Right.
I'm
Absolutely.
Through.
I agree.
I'm through.
And they're going after higher education too. I just published this piece in the Washington Monthly, and I quote J.D. Vance, who said, "Universities are the enemy." And they have a very aggressive program to go after colleges and universities and try to eliminate programming that's anti-American and put in its place, curriculum around American exceptionalism and, that slavery really didn't happen, all of that.
And also add that, Ms. Reynolds, I agree with you. It's not, it's the policy, but it's also what comes through out of Project 2025. It's a really dim worldview of women's role in society, old-fashioned, backwards, and just plain sexist. I think one proposal that illustrates that is ostensibly to help kids. Project 2025 proposes a child support tax credit, but what they do is they give that to men with the idea that men should be a non-resident father. Could be a father gets along well with the family, could be an abusive situation as you are talking about. And they're trying to provide the money to the father so that the father can be, quote, a financial provider. And this is, we know in reality, children tend to spend more time with the mother, and this really is rooting the money through the father. It's a view that men should be the provider, men should be in control of finances. That is the opposite of empowering women.
Yeah, it's based on the religious idea of complementarianism. A lot of the folks behind this are evangelicals, and this idea that you know, there's a dominant leader, male, who's a breadwinner, subordinate wife, stays home, takes care of the kids. This is the model of marriage, and that kind of language, biblically based marriage, is laced throughout the document.
May I ask you where was this idea? Where was it born? Where did it come from originally? I mean, it's easy to say, well, this reminds me of The Handmaid's Tale, but that's written by a woman and it's made up. But where did this originate from? Is it from the evangelical community?
Well, I think it's a combination of wealthy people who don't want government regulation, and it's what the coalition of the Republican Party has become. This combination of, yes, this evangelical religious folks, but also, you know, the wealthy multimillionaires, billionaires that don't want, you know, they want more control, less government regulation. But I don't know, Emily, what do you think?
So I unfortunately can't speak much to the sort of philosophical history of it, but I think, you know, again, you know, as Carrie said, it's very much in, you know, what they sell as Christian values. I mean, I'm a Christian, my values are very different, but I think it's returning this idea of tradition. I think some of it might also just be, you know, not well channeled, but an economic response to seeing, you know, to seeing the rise of women and women gaining economic power, women being able to be breadwinners, and fighting against that as a really toxic way of trying to restore what they think the ideal of masculinity is.
I mean, think about how JD Vance speaks. In a way, the Project 2025 agenda reflects that kind of attitude. You know, childless cat ladies, women need to be producing children or they aren't real women, and they need to be staying home and taking care of the, you know, it's this very sort of backward idea, you know, of marriage and women's roles in contemporary society.
I believe they're just using religion as a way to draw people in, because everybody
Yes.
has their own religion, and we're following the Bible, we're doing this what the Bible says or whatever, and then, you know, just use that as an excuse to get people in. But yet, look what they're doing. Are they doing anything to help the poor, to help the needy, to help the what? So they're helping the greedy, but not the needy. So I believe they're using religion just to draw people in.
Yeah.
Well, ladies, I do want to be mindful of our time. It's 9:05. So
Okay.
we have went a few minutes over. Like I said, I could listen to both of you speak all night. This has just been so fabulous and so informative. But I do just want to be respectful of everyone's time. I just want to leave it to you if you have one last thing that you want to share with everyone here before we wrap up. Please go ahead.
I would just say share what you've learned tonight with people in your community, people on your social networks. Let people know this is really serious. We are all going to suffer if this goes into I mean, it's there anyway, but if this becomes the policy of the United States, it's going to be permanent damage. It's not something that the next president can get back in and repair, because, you know, we've built up the federal government over decades and decades, the expertise, the knowledge, the know-how, and this is what they're trying to destroy. So I just think that we really need to be focused in the coming weeks.
I would say it's tempting to dismiss these policies as just so far-fetched and so extreme that maybe they wouldn't happen. But if you look at what's happening in some states, they are happening now. And so it's not, you know, beyond the imagination to imagine that a future administration could actually institute these things. We've already seen the erosion of public schools in Iowa. We've seen, you know, draconian abortion bans in Texas and other places. We've already seen abuse of checks and balances by forum shopping, judge shopping, which is how the case on emergency abortion care got to the Supreme Court, which is how Dobbs overturned Roe. And so, you know, these policies are not just there; they are very real. They're happening, and we, you know, I think we have the chance to educate people and stop these from becoming reality for more of America.
Thank you. Again, thank you both so much for being here with us this evening. I've got your information for your links. I'll send those out in the follow-up email. This panel was recorded, so the recording will go out shortly, early next week. Thank you again all so much. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you all have a lovely evening. Please share what you've learned.
Thank you,
Thank
Emily.
you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.